Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming out on this kind of cold night. I'm glad to see my books are sitting here where I left them. I have this recurring dream that I do a reading like this, except usually there's thousands of people, and I show up and I have no book or anything to read, I just forgot it. And so I always, remember now. Anyway, let's see. What am I going to do here? I'm going to read from my book, Cloudbreak, California. This is a little cheesy, the whole advertisement. I feel like I'm working for some corporation or something. But I have a slideshow. There's 2 pictures that I want you guys to see. And I needed a kind of holder picture, so just apologizing for my self-promotion there. I believe I have a couple of plans, but I'm going to go with my first, I think, unless things just start feeling wrong. I'm going to read just 3 fairly brief sections from Cloudbreak. One from the beginning, from the first chapter, one from, and then a couple toward the middle, and in the kind of, I timed it and it lasted about 35 minutes, so maybe it'll go to 40, but probably not. Just in case you're wondering how long you're going to be subjected to this kind of thing. I did help run the River Reading series a number of years before Amanda took over, and that's the one thing I always told the writers, like, just don't go on too long. No matter how brilliant you are, people need to get on with their lives at some point. I also would love to answer any questions you have at the end, or stand here awkwardly while no question. So just everybody simmers for a bit. That's good too. Okay, I'm going to jump a couple of pages forward just for time. The first chapter develops basically what you need to know before I jump into where I'm starting is that I was in 9th grade in a speech class, it so happens, and suddenly I was actually enjoying the speech that was being made by a student, and I hated school, which is why I became a professor. It just, that was the day that this messenger, the student messenger, shows up and calls me out of class to the office. And I'm like, what? And I get to the office, and my father's there, and I hadn't seen him in a number of months. My father and my little brother. And he kind of loads us in his car, which is a Range Rover. I call it a Rover here, so you'll know that's what I'm talking about. And we're driving down the freeway from an inland part of Southern California, a place called Redlands, toward the beach cities in Orange County that my dad haunted. 10 miles down the freeway, Dad still hadn't explained why he pulled us from school. He was in a dark mood, so I didn't press. It had taken almost an hour while the principal, mean Dr. Green, called my mother, checked Dad's ID, and generally made a production out of excusing me from class. Just another little man on a power trip, Dad said to no one and laughed a bit. Well, I said, thanks for busting me loose. I hoped for a quip in response, one of his warnings to never trust what they taught me in school, but Dad only looked at me and smiled in this sad, disappointed way he had. We rose onto the big bow-tie junction that led from the 10 to the 91, way above low-flung San Bernardino. A blanket of brown haze lay above the land, hiding even the nearby mountains. Aside from the Ferris wheel of a traveling carnival, all I could see were small boxy buildings, tangles of power lines, and cars moving along an infinite grid of streets. We coasted back to Earth and drove on, silent except for the rattle of the rover's engine, the hum of the tires, and the wind whistling through old window seals. We passed through Riverside, then Corona, and into an undeveloped stretch that marked a transition from the Inland Empire to Orange County. A shallow river valley followed the freeway to the right, full of sparkling green trees, bare brown hills on the left. I nestled into the seat and yawned, lulled by the familiar rhythm of freeway travel. I figured you should hear from me first, Dad said, and cleared his throat, instead of reading about it in the paper or whatever. I opened my eyes and saw him wince at the windshield, as if he'd bitten into a lemon. They say Barkley was sleeping with Julie. That's not it. I had no idea what he was talking about. Julie was his new wife, a woman I'd only met a few times. I knew Barkley by name, a cousin of my father's who had some money. I remember, he said, staring intently forward and gripping the wheel so hard the veins bulged from his forearms. I remember thinking about how many lives that man had ruined, and then I woke up in jail with a real bad feeling. For a while, he chuckled grimly, shaking his head. For a while, what? Did he say jail? My heart began to pound, and my stomach clenched. To be honest, it was kind of a relief when the guard finally told me I killed Barkley. We drove in silence long enough for the words to take on their meanings. He turned to me, a pale-eyed man with a round Irish face, roughed up by the sun. You can cry if you want, he said. I blinked hard and looked away, surprised by his words. I placed my hand over my mouth to hide a giddy smile creeping onto my face. I don't want to make excuses, he said, but Barkley wasn't a good man. The air in the Rover began to shimmer, and everything went strangely vivid. Dad's voice didn't travel through the space between us. It was just there in my head. Meanwhile, the other sounds, engine, tires, wind, came hushed, as if through a thick bubble of glass. The wax on the dashboard appeared distant and huge. Sorry, I forgot to mention there's a piece of surf wax that's melted onto his dashboard, something I described earlier in the chapter. The wax on the dashboard appeared distant and huge, like something you traveled to visit, climbing over the contours and cracks to get to that mound of frozen melt. The long, angled stick shift was the same, an outrageous landmark. I too was giant, the hand on my lap carved from a mountain to the scale of Rushmore. I looked out the window, and the world revealed itself as false. A movie set thrown together just for this moment. The cars speeding by were driven by actors pretending not to notice what was going on. The trees and the sky were painted onto screens. I covered my face in my hands to contain the maniac laughter bubbling in my chest. Oh no, I wasn't going to cry. The opposite. I felt wonderful. I know this sounds strange, even cold-blooded, but that's the right word. Full of wonder. I'd become an actor playing myself in the movie about my life, and I knew nothing was ever going to be the same again. The chapter goes on. I wouldn't recommend any of my students end a chapter with, and nothing was ever going to be the same again. So I wouldn't do it either. It's a little too portentous. Shortly after this, my father jumped bail and disappeared. The chapter really has a lot to do with my speech class because I had to go back and still give a speech in this dreaded speech class. This life goes on no matter what small tragedy is going on in your personal life. I'm going to jump ahead. What happens, the rest of the book, this first chapter is a little misleading in that it's fairly heavy and it also takes place when I'm a child. The rest of the book takes place in my 20s, and obviously this moment and this fact affected my life a lot. But most of my life has been a really good time, and a lot of it is just kind of celebrating that good time, and it made me weird and angry and strange in certain ways, but it also just kind of shot me off in directions I wouldn't have gone anyway. And I'm going to read a couple of little pieces of this. The next chapter starts when he is captured in the Philippines. I'm a college student at that point. After a checkered kind of adolescence and early 20s, getting into a fair amount of trouble, but then eventually going to college, getting cultivated, domesticated a little bit by college, one of our many functions here, places like this. About to settle down, or at least thinking seriously about taking on more adult responsibilities. And then I get a call from my grandmother that says he's been captured, and I really flipped out. And the way I reacted to that news, I dumped everything, all the kind of half-baked plans I had. I left the girlfriend that I was living with, and I flew a cheap flight into Guatemala. And I spent the next few years wandering much of that time, as much as I could afford in Latin America, in Central America and Mexico, taking a lot of chances, having some fun, but also indulging in some self-destructive behavior. I'm going to jump ahead somewhere toward the middle of the book. I'm in Salvador at this point, but I'm actually going to jump back. This is a flashback scene, one of few. I'm in Salvador staying at this crazy thing called a government resort. I don't know, what is a government resort? It was this place that I heard you could stay free because the government was trying to get people tourists to spend money in their country, even though a civil war was going on. And I showed up, and predictably there was not a single person there but me and this guard, this armed guard, who insisted I play ping pong with him constantly. And I stayed in a giant barracks with hundreds of army cots, and I got to pick anyone I wanted. Also, the place was infested by bats. It turned out at night. Hundreds and hundreds of bats flew in from the drop ceiling and filled this barracks as I was going to sleep the first night. This is the second night, or the second day I planned to leave. So anyway, here it is. I woke at dawn, intending to walk into town, and then the resort, so-called, is about a couple of miles outside of a town called La Libertad, which also happens to be a fairly famous surf spot. I woke at dawn, intending to walk into town and then leave the Centro de Abrero resort in the afternoon. On the way, I paused at the famous surf spot and watched a dozen riders catching a long, left-breaking wave, about shoulder high. Envying their grace, I wished once again I'd learned to surf as a kid and cursed my father a little for leaving us out in the desert, depriving me of my birthright. As long as I could remember, I'd felt like one of those storybook princes switched at birth and raised by peasants. If only I waited long enough, my true identity would be revealed and I'd be restored to the palace. But maybe it wasn't like that at all, I thought, watching a surfer duck dive under a wall of foam, a move I could never have pulled off. It certainly wouldn't have been the first time I'd pretended to be somebody I wasn't, so convincingly I believed my own impersonation. I'd gone through high school as a sort of amateur method actor, playing a character day and night I'd plagiarized from an actual Hollywood movie. I first encountered him on video, Jeff Spicoli, the stone surfer in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, while sitting on the couch with my mom and Ralph, it's my stepdad, Ralph, a few months after my dad disappeared. Let's see if this works. This is, in case you guys don't know the cultural reference, this is Jeff Spicoli. He was my idol. No explanation, just, you know. The sad part is he still kind of is. The shot was of an old VW surfer bus, windows opaque. The side door slides open, and out of a dense cloud of smoke tumbles a then unknown Sean Penn. He lands on his back, climbs to his feet, whips his scraggly blonde hair from his face, and hides his eyes behind big plastic sunglasses. Then he goes to class, way late. I'd felt weightless with joy at the sight of him in his Ocean Pacific corduroy shorts, checkered van skateboard shoes, Baja poncho. He looked like all my father's friends, but better. Spicoli was funny. My hands began to sweat, and one foot started madly tapping the floor. Gone was the squirming uncertainty that had been my life's default mode. Finally, I knew what to do, who to be. I'd been searching in the usual places: sports, drama, attempts to meet girls, even Dungeons and Dragons. But nothing ever quite fit, not until Spicoli. A surfer who never surfed, a student who didn't study. He stole the show without trying, without even acknowledging there was a show to steal. How cool he was, how untouchable, how beyond history teacher Mr. Hand's tight-fisted sanctimonious. A lack of effort, a slackness was his weapon, and I saw that I'd been going about it all wrong. Where I'd been doing more, I should have been doing less. Spicoli smoked pot, and that's pretty much all he did. I figured I could handle that, or at least pretend. I developed a little laugh, like a very soft machine gun. The other students didn't know what to make of me, and my raggy clothes, swim trunks in class, and shuffling gait. But eventually they figured it out. I was an idiot. A couple of months into the Spicoli Act, my best friend and D&D cohort, the bespectacled, nerdy, and brilliant Rob P., who I haven't told I actually wrote this book or put him in it yet. Afraid. Anyway, shocked me utterly one afternoon by producing a 2-foot-tall bong from his older brother's closet. He expertly packed it full and fired it up. I could barely credit what I saw. Rob was actually doing it, smoking pot. I felt like a little kid as he set the bong before me, flicked the lighter. Just a minute, I wanted to say, hold on, even as I fit my mouth into the cylinder and sucked. Water bubbled, smoke swirled, alchemy was happening in there. I filled my lungs with hot smoke, coughed out a sweet cloud, and was higher than I'd ever wanted to be. I melted onto the floor and drained down the stairs into the living room, where I oozed into the fat chair and lay back, madly licking my pasty mouth and lips, noting for the first time the strange elasticity and squiggling energy of the human tongue. I chomped and licked and probed and smacked, having turned into nothing more than a giant mouth. That's when I saw him. In front of me and just under the ceiling floated the disembodied head of Felix the cat. This is Felix the cat, in case you need a visual. It was the size of a jumbo beach ball, smiling insanely and frantically licking his lips, mocking my precise mouth movements. It wasn't as if he'd just appeared, more like he'd been here all along, and only now had I bothered to notice. He grinned, frenetic mouth. His grinning, frenetic mouth was full of sharp teeth. He was not my friend. Would anyone like something from my magic bag of tricks? I kept hearing in his falsetto voice. I tried to master the workings of my mind, but the vision persisted. Like a nightmare you know is a nightmare but still can't escape. It occurred to me that I might be stuck like this forever. First occurred and then became a certainty. I'd done it now, destroyed my brain. From here on, I'd have to go through life pretending to ignore the giant cat head following me around like a personal moon. I tried to dispel Felix by feigning great interest in Rob playing in television on the console, but it didn't work. Apparently Felix could read my thoughts, and no matter where I looked, he'd bob just inside my field of sight. There'd be no way I could handle this over the long haul. The authorities would eventually catch on and lock me up. That chapter goes on as well, but I'll move to the next. So don't smoke pot. That's the message of the book, really. One of the places I ended up, my travels started in Central America and eventually ended up in Mexico, just kind of one step closer to, I guess, an American system, you might say. And in fact, I found myself in a place called Puerto Vallarta, which is a really nice Mexican resort, and I liked it. And it felt like it was away from there, which is here. But it was familiar enough, and there was enough going on that I kind of wanted to stay. And one of the recurring problems of my life at this point was money. I just kept running out of it. The way I wanted to be, you know, I needed support in some way, and I didn't. So I just had to keep working, which is the last thing I wanted to do. That was really what I didn't want to do. So I'd find myself in places that I wanted to stay, but then I'd have to find a job or something. Coming from America to Mexico or Central America, looking for work is a very stupid direction to go. It's usually the other way around for good reason. But I was down there always looking for a way to make a buck, just to hang around longer. And here I am in Vallarta. I'd been there a couple days, and I'm just like, I like this place. Let me see if I can stick around. Walking along the boardwalk, I accidentally caught the eye of a lanky teenager manning one of the bright white kiosks scattered all over town. I didn't know the function these uniformed kids served, but they were everywhere, accosting passers-by with glossy photos of vacation splendor, yachts and jet skis and beautiful women lounging on sugar sand beaches. Whatever they were selling, I couldn't afford. "Hey dude," said the youth, "you want to make 100 pesos? I stopped. 100 pesos? That was somewhere around 10 bucks. I knew it must be a scam, but I was curious. "No such thing as a free lunch," Salter shouted in my head, but I chose not to listen. I have to back up. Mr. Salter is my speech teacher, and his catchphrase was "no such thing as a free lunch." That's what he taught us. It's something of a, you might say, a theme or just a recurring idea in the story. "No such thing as a free lunch," Salter shouted in my head, but I chose not to listen. "Come here," the kid said, looking left and right to be sure the coast was clear. "I ain't gonna bite you. My name's Rudy." He stuck out his hand and I accepted it reluctantly. I look at you and say, "This guy doesn't want to buy a timeshare. You got those sandals, that shirt. So I'm not going to waste your time with a pitch. Here's the truth. Whenever I sign somebody up for a presentation, they pay me 200 pesos. I'll split it with you, bro. 100 pesos, and all you have to do is eat breakfast and see a hotel room. It takes about an hour. Easy money. 100 for you, 100 for me, no problem." I thought for a moment. 100 pesos would pay for my hotel room that night. Nothing to retire on, but it was a start. And I'd be grifting the grifters, sticking it to the big chain hotels that were taking over the world and sapping the last bit of authenticity from towns like Vallarta. "Okay," I said. "How often can I do it?" "How often?" Rudy covered his surprise, and I felt a stab of misgiving. "You can do it every day if you want." "What about twice a day?" I calculated that I could live on that, especially with a couple of free meals thrown in. "No problem. Let me set something up for tomorrow to start. When do I get paid?" Early the next morning, Rudy took me by taxi to the Mayan Palace Resort. I walked through a crowd of old folks in cabana wear, by a fountain shaped like a Mayan pyramid spewing water from its tip. In the echoing lobby, I shook a skinny, wrinkled man's hand. He wore a suit that smelled strongly of cigarette smoke, and his fly was half down. "Dick," he said, pumping my hand. "Dick Rubin." He pointed me to the deluxe breakfast buffet, where I ate chafing dish fare and drank watery coffee. Stuffed and jittery, I was led to a small, windowless office and sat across a desk from Dick. Now in private, he sighed theatrically. Of all the rotten luck, he was thinking, looking me over with a little shake of his head. I get a guy in a stained t-shirt who hasn't shaved in a week. I dressed raggedly in Huarache sandals and canvas shorts, thinking they'd let me go early if I gave them no hope of a sale. I'm not going to buy anything, I announced. You might as well turn me loose and save the trouble. It's not so easy, my friend, he said, and opened a photo album full of the sorts of pictures that line the kiosks. We're stuck with each other. He smiled, showing brown teeth, sadism firing his beady black eyes. And then he was off, interrogating me. How often do you vacation? I never vacation. What do you call what you're doing right now? Living. Okay, how often do you live? I don't understand the question. On and on it went, Dick asking questions from an endless stack of forms, me more or less answering truthfully. Just an hour, I thought, and went into robot mode. But an hour turned into an hour and a half, and then 2 hours, and we'd only gotten through half of the papers on Dick's desk. The walls were bare white, and Dick's only decoration was a framed picture on his desk of several interlocking gears and synergy written below in yellow print. Shouldn't we be done by now? I asked. We'll get you out of here soon, Dick said, smiling evilly. Numbers played a big part in his argument. He'd push graphs and charts at me, explaining how this plus this equaled I'd be the biggest dipshit in history if I didn't sign his papers. I could no longer even try to make sense of what he was saying. I just heard the monotone of his voice, watching his ever-moving, hangdog mouth surrounded by black stubble. A wattle swung below his chin as he talked. How about some fresh air, he finally asked, going on 3 hours. Thank you, I said, vaguely aware that I was succumbing to Stockholm Syndrome. We walked out of the main building onto a dock in a man-made bay. Dick produced a key and led me into a bungalow on the dock. It was a serviceable room with a view of a beach, fenced off even out into the water. Shark-free swimming, Dick said, following my gaze. Kick off your shoes, try the bed. I touched the mattress. It was covered in a slick-feeling spread decorated with red and yellow boxes. The room smelled of some kind of sweet air freshener. No, thanks, I said. I'll fall asleep and then you'll just wake me up. Actually, I'm pretty ready to leave. Don't worry, we're almost done. I've heard that before, I said, my voice about to crack. I'm 5 seconds from walking out. What about your gift, he asked. You don't want to forfeit the commemorative tequila or traditional blanket when you're so close. I sighed and stared out the window at the people on the beach, free to come and go as they pleased. Come on, he said. Cheer up. I'll introduce you to Jim. Jim's a great guy. He used to play for the Dallas Cowboys. What do you think of that? I think it's sad, I said, and we walked back into the hotel. Dick knocked on a hollow walnut-paneled door. Come in, called the deep voice. The man standing behind the desk was large and meaty, with an enormous belly and jowls tinged red. An inch of gray roots gave way to a head of clairol brown hair over a perfectly square face. He gripped my hand as I knew he would, 1 degree tighter than firm. My own hand was sweaty, and I was trembling from fatigue and coffee come down. Dick left us and I sat. Jim's office was twice the size of Dick's and looked out on a parking lot. 2 of the 4 walls were covered in Dallas Cowboy banners, posters, and trinkets. The remaining wall space was devoted to sports-themed motivational posters, including a giant one of Vince Lombardi, which apparently included the entire text of his famous speech. Dick treat you right? I shrugged, thinking no. He badgered me for 3.5 hours. But I had no desire to complain to this man, who I already liked even less than the odious Dick. I see you looking at my ring, Jim said, smiling. In contrast to Dick's stained teeth, Jim's were whiter than was natural and large. He held out his right hand as if I were expected to kiss the giant ring. Among diamonds, I read the words, Dallas Cowboys, world champions. Nice, I said. I take it you were on the team? That's the only way to get one of these babies. What'd you play? Linebacker, special teams. You look it, I said. Thanks. Now let's get to business. His smile collapsed as he shuffled through the papers before him. When he looked up, he appeared angry. I see you're single. Yes. You mean to meet a woman someday? I meet women all the time. I'm talking about a good woman, a woman to marry. I'm not looking for a wife, no. Are you a faggot? I opened my mouth to respond, but couldn't find anything to say. Just kidding, Jim said. No, but seriously, are you homosexual? No, I said. Do I look gay? It was a stupid question, and I immediately regretted asking it. Jim didn't respond. My point is, he said, that you've got to grow up one day. You're pushing 30, and 1, you don't have a job. 2, you don't have a pot to piss in. 3, you look like a vagabond. I wouldn't be surprised if that's where you end up if you keep on this road, in the streets, begging for food and hooch. You need to learn to take responsibility, to accept the commitments that separate men from boys. Personally, I think buying one of our properties, joining our little family, would be a perfect start for a guy like you. For just a few bucks a month, you'd actually own something. Think of that. Imagine meeting a woman, a real quality lady. Think what you'll say when you tell her that you don't just have one vacation home, you've got hundreds. How many guys can say that? Listen, I said. I told Dick 100 times. You leave Dick out of this, Jim shouted. I leaned far back in my chair. It seemed possible he'd attack me. You're talking to me now. Forget everything else. I'm leaving, I announced. Hey, Jim was up and blocking the door. Come on, buddy. Don't be so sensitive. You don't want to miss out on the gift, do you? Not after all this work you've put in. We're almost there. That's what everybody keeps telling me, I said, tears pushing at my eyelids. But it just doesn't end. Come on, sit down. Don't be a baby. Now Jim was wounded. After all he and the others had done for me, I was still refusing to be a part of the family. I rolled my head back and looked at the drop tile ceiling, just like the ones back in the States. I answered in monosyllables and shrugged a lot. Finally, after 40 minutes with Jim, the pitch was over. Jim, disappointed, hurt, and angry, led me to a secretary who had me sign a form that confirmed I'd elected not to buy a timeshare in spite of everyone's best efforts. And then she asked if I wanted a blanket or tequila. Tequila. I knew you'd say that, she said. She handed me a minuscule cardboard box, allegedly containing a bottle. From a payphone outside, I dialed the number Rudy had given me, and 10 minutes later he picked me up in the same cab that had dropped me off. Here you go, he said, and handed me a 50 peso bill. I got another presentation arranged for tomorrow. You said it would take an hour, I whined. They kept me like a prisoner. Next time, just say, I gotta go. I did say that. Say it louder this time. Meet me at 8, okay? We drove for a while, and I wondered how this kid could afford cab rides. Probably the driver was a friend of his, or he was also getting the cut of the deal. Or perhaps he was paid by the timeshare company for reasons beyond me. The extent of the operation spread like a net, and it seemed to cover the whole town. I didn't want to hear about timeshares anymore, but I agreed to one more session. A job's a job. I gave my word. I needed the money. I was going to have to start taking responsibility for my life. I'll stop there.